Well, greetings YouTube. 2012 is now upon us, and like every other YouTube channel in existence, it's time to reflect on 2011. Now, I'm going to be doing in this podcast a top 5 movies of 2011, obviously, but there's a few things I have to go over first. 1, why am I only doing 5? Well, I could do 10, but I actually saw less movies than I saw last year. Thus, I have a smaller selection. Also, because I saw less movies than I saw last year, I was more careful in my choosing. I won't lie, the reason I saw less movies is partially economical. Times are tough for people. And thus, my selection of movies was more careful, which is why I'm not doing a worst movies of the year, because, well, I tried to avoid those bad movies. I wasn't completely successful. As we'll get into, I will mention my worst movies of the year and my most disappointing movie of the year in a bit. But I really can't do a top 5 list, because I really want to be worst movies of the year. They would just be ones I liked the least, with a few ones that were actually bad, and then a few that were just plain forgettable. But without further ado, I should get into the top 5. And before I start again, I should mention, these are only the movies I saw this year. If there's a movie that, well, let's say I didn't see, and it's not on this list, well, I can't really put it on this list because I can't give it any accreditation, shall we say. I can't say whether it's good or bad. So, if you want to know what I saw this year, well and behold, I have a YouTube channel where I review movies. Go check it out. You'll probably spot what I've seen and what I haven't. So let's get into this thing with number 5, Immortals. This might be a little bit of a controversial one for some people, because a lot of people thought the story was crap, but I found it acceptable. Barely. There were plot holes, certainly. They tried to cover up some of those plot holes with rather quick, subtle references that I think a lot of people missed. But I'm kind of a sucker for these ancient Greek stories. It's a fascinating thing for me. So it got into the top 5. Perhaps with more time to digest, it'll drop down. Let's face it, movies do fluctuate in your likes and your dislikes of them, especially when they're new. And this one was only seen a month and a half ago. So there's still time for it to digest a bit. Number 4 was Sherlock Holmes, A Game of Shadows. Now, the original Sherlock Holmes, well, at least from the Guy Ritchie series, is one of my favorite films of all time. So it's no surprise that Sherlock Holmes' sequel, A Game of Shadows, made it on this list by just repeating a lot of the same stuff from the first film. However, the first film is still far superior. There was a lot of problems in that this wasn't as much as being a detective story, which is basically, well, I shouldn't say basically, it is what Sherlock Holmes is supposed to be. This seemed more like a spy caper, more like James Bond, 1890, than a Sherlock Holmes film. There was less investigation, there was less figuring out what a murder had been committed. And I think trotting around Europe probably was a bit of a mistake. This is a film that really should stay set in one general location. They wanted a little bit of variety going between, let's say, London and the countryside of England, and then save Europe for like the third movie. But it was still fairly enjoyable. It was a decent action film. The action was very exciting. Big key thing for an action movie. And of course, Robert Downey Jr. and Jude Law were great together as well. They maybe took a few aspects from the previous film and, well, did them a little too much, but I'm hoping if they do wind up making a third film, they've learned and will tune down some of that a bit. Number 3 was X-Men First Class, which was really a big surprise. I was not going into this film expecting it to be great. I was expecting it to be okay, redeeming itself from X-Men 3 and Wolverine. And lo and behold, it's probably the best X-Men movie there's been. If I were to say there's only one fault, I think they hit you a little too hard over the head with the gay message. I mean, X-Men, and I think that's been a flaw of the entire series, is they want to take it directly into it being about gay rights, and kind of as a result excluding all the other groups. I mean, X-Men technically is supposed to be about anybody that's been excluded or ostracized in society, not one particular segment. And also, there's still the failure of this movie to address what is actually the really biggest issue that X-Men deals with, but subtly no one talks about for some reason, is race. Especially if you're set in the 1960s. X-Men First Class should have dealt heavily with racism and racial injustice and the coming 60s racial revolution. I mean, really, as much as I just said X-Men's supposed to be about any group that's been ostracized by society, it was designed in the 60s and heavily referenced and was about the racial issues. You know, Malcolm X was Magneto. Martin Luther King was Professor Xavier. I mean, these are basics, and this was really what X-Men's bread and butter was for decades until, well, I guess about the 90s when racial issues kind of did settle down and they began expanding a little bit more to any issue or any group. But to then set a movie in the 60s and really, outside of perhaps one quick reference, not deal with it at all? Come on, guys. However, despite this going on all about that for my third favorite film of the year, or third best, I must say that this film was really enjoyable. The characters made a lot of sense, were likable, or dislikable. Kevin Bacon was a surprisingly effective villain. I mean, really, I did not see Kevin Bacon as being this batshit evil guy. He pulls off the Nazi quite good. Not to mention, later on, he plays off a really good 60s villain with his swinging submarine. That was fucking cool. Xavier's characterization was pretty good, too. You see him in his college years, him swinging, where he's not fully the Xavier of today, which is pretty good. I mean, they really could have messed that up and made him the same exact character he was in the original X-Men movies, but no, we see him a little bit more free-flowing, a little bit more swinging. Yes, he's super smart. Yes, he's got a lot of the same character traits, but he's also still different. He's clearly a younger version of himself. And authentically, as in he does have certain character traits, because let's face it, people do change over time. If you don't believe me, go talk to yourself when you were 12 years old. You'll notice there's a lot of things that are different about you. Number 2 is another comic book movie. This one being Thor. Now, I should say I did have to somewhat choose between Captain America and Thor. And, well, Thor won on this one, and it was really enjoyable. One, it deals with a lot of themes that I like combining science fiction and fantasy. That is something that is very appealing to me. And it did it quite well. It also had a very good but basic plotline. Guy has to learn his responsibilities. It also has a fish out of water tale. That was actually done effectively because, let's face it, the fish out of water tale is the cheap Hollywood move, and therefore it normally fails horribly. And while I would have loved to see Thor take place more in Asgard, I understand it needed to be brought down to Earth because they had to start tying him into Avengers from the get-go. Hopefully the sequel will be even better because they won't have to worry about doing that tying in as much, and they can really concentrate on having a story set in Asgard or one of the other worlds. But again, great character casting they did with everyone. Action was solid, and did a very good job of tying in with the rest of the Avengers films. I thought some people didn't like it, but lo and behold, I'm not those people. Now, my favorite film of the year is surprisingly a film that actually bombed at the box office. And I think this just goes to show you that box office results really don't indicate long-term, or whether a film was good or not, or even, as I was about to say, whether they'll show long-term success for a movie. My number one film of the year is Cowboys and Aliens. I still say this was the best cast film of the year. I mean, not only do you have the main leads of Harrison Ford, Daniel Craig, and Olivia Wilde, but there's a ton of excellent character actors throughout the rest of the cast. Clancy Brown, Sam Rockwell, Walter Goggins appears in it. I mean, with such a solid backing secondary actors, a decent direction job by Jon Favreau, actual practical effects. I mean, let's face it, most films today won't even do a real explosion. They'll do a CGI explosion. They're shooting those air cannons off. They have actual explosions. I mean, yeah, a lot of the aliens are done CGI, but it's kind of hard for them to do that. The ships are CGI, but I mean, spaceships flying around are acceptable in CGI. But a lot of the other stuff is live action. The sets are there. They actually go out. I mean, if George Lucas was doing this, they wouldn't even go out into the desert. He would green screen in the desert. And then wonder why the actors gave such wooden performances when they were sitting in a tight, air-conditioned blue room and not in an actual desert. And it had a decent story that paralleled. Well, it was before the aliens even show up in this film. It was a decent Western story. I mean, it really was a bunch of aliens interrupting a classic Western movie. Before the aliens show up, you're invested in all the characters, you're interested in the plot, and if the aliens never did show up, you're almost confident that you would actually watch a very, very interesting Western film. But the aliens do show up, and lo and behold, these characters are taken into a completely different place. One that is enjoyable to the audience. Now, some people might complain about the gold aspect, but I mean, come on, think about it. Humans today are leagues above what we were in the 1800s, and yet gold is more valuable today than it was back then. So, is it that hard to believe that gold might still be a valuable resource now to an advanced society? I mean, hey, I can believe it. But that is my top film of the year. Now, with that said, how was 2011 in general? Well, it was mediocre. It was really disappointing, actually, in many respects. But I'm going to get into that in a second. First, I have a few honorable mentions. Now, I said I did top 5 because I didn't see as many movies, but also partially because, really, once I get out of the top 5, there's really hard to distinguish which ones is 6 really that much better than number 7. So I have a bunch of honorable mentions because it just doesn't make sense to rank them. We have Battle Los Angeles, which I know a lot of people will disagree with, but it met all of my expectations. I wanted to see a good old-fashioned alien invasion film, and I wanted just a good old battle film, kind of like Black Hawk Now, where it's just one long battle, but there's still characterization moments in it. There's still lulls in the battle, all that stuff. And lo and behold, Battle Los Angeles did deliver. So, it was one of my preferred films of the year. Of course, Captain America: The First Avenger. It was a damn good World War II pulp film, really. I enjoyed it. I know a lot of people out there enjoyed it. I happen to like Thor better, though, so Thor got ranked up much higher. But if I was doing a top 10 list, certainly Captain America would be on there. Probably at number 6. Another honorable mention is Super 8. This film really did feel like it was an actual old Steven Spielberg movie. If you just showed me this film back in the 80s, or early 90s really for me, it would outside of this use of CGI, I wouldn't be able to tell this was really I guess for back then, a movie from the future, but a non-Steven Spielberg film. And considering that's what J.J. Abrams' goal was, you succeeded, my friend. And it was a damn good story. And the final honorable mention is Drive Angry. I mean, this was just a plain fun film. I didn't see it in 3D. I actually did catch a 2D showing of this. And it was still fun. It was still fun. People, it knew exactly what it was, and it just went with it. And it was not based on original source material. It was just a film that had a crazy premise, went with it, and it enjoyed itself. And this is what movies are supposed to be. Fun, escapist entertainment. Sure, you can have your more serious films like War Horse and such in there, but really, you want to have these movies too. And it was quite enjoyable. And we got to see Nicolas Cage have sex with a woman while he's in a gunfight. Yes, he did not stop one or the other. He did them both at the same time. Now, with all that good stuff said, it's time to get into the bad films of the year. And I was going to do a quick, what was the worst film of the year. However, I felt I had to split this up somewhat. Because there was the worst, and then there was the most disappointing film of the year. And for me, the most disappointing film of the year was one I actually recommended at first. But looking back on it, well, I think I had to change my mind. And it wasn't just from everyone telling me I was wrong. I mean, certain parts of me are still saying I was right. Well, we'll get into all this in a second. Let's first name the film. Most disappointing film of 2011, Conan the Barbarian. Yeah, now the original Arnold Schwarzenegger Conan the Barbarian is my favorite film of all time. And I think that's what really led me wanting to go in there, wanting to like this film. It's like The Phantom Menace. When people first saw The Phantom Menace, everybody said they loved it. And then they really, after they took some time to really digest, analyze the film, they then came and confessed that, no, it wasn't that good. That's what happened to me here. Now, there's still some problems, and, well, there's still some things to be said, though, about this film. It has action scenes. It has a ton of action scenes, and, well, that was the problem, partially. They had so many action scenes and so little characterization and plot moments that the action scenes carried no emotional weight. I mean, look at the original Conan the Barbarian. There's relatively few action scenes. You have the opening battle. I guess you can count a few of the quick shots of Conan fighting in the arena. Then we really don't have any action scenes until they raid the first temple and steal the Eye of the Serpent. And then again, really no action scenes again until they attack Thulsa Doom's Mountain of Power at night where they're wearing the cool camo. And then there's the final battle. It's 5 action scenes total. One of them is even somewhat, is it really an action scene, or is it just showed a couple guys getting stabbed real quick? But 5 action scenes in a 2-hour-long film. This had well over twice that amount. They really could have cut out half of those scenes, spent that screen time on characterization and plot, and we would have felt a lot better for the characters. I mean, and we had actors in here which can pull it off. Jason Momoa's a decent actor. Not only was he physically perfect for the role, the guy can act. Anyone who's seen Game of Thrones knows that. Same thing with the villain. Even outside of Avatar, Stephen Lang is a damn good actor. He did an excellent Stonewall Jackson in Gods and Generals. The guy can fucking act. So there really wasn't any reason for this film not to be good. They had a good acting cast, which leads me to blame the director partially. And that's why it's disappointing. You could tell that this film could have been great. They had a lot of the feel from the original comic books and stories. I mean, the settings and art design were pretty much spot on. They just couldn't direct this, and they couldn't really characterization. Hell, they couldn't even stay in one spot. Seriously. No one scene stays in the same location, or you never see that location again. Conan the Barbarian, yeah, they did some traveling, but they also were in the same areas quite often. And that's actually normally a pretty good thing for a film. It shows some form of stability. It allows the audience to know that we're in the same location they've seen before, and that allows them to concentrate then on the plot and the actors. I mean, films that are constantly going one place to the other, they have their, role, but not this film. And I'm going on too long for this Conan disappointment. Again, it does have some things. I mean, if you just want to watch people hit each other with swords, it's an okay film. If you want to get your gore satisfied, it's got a lot of fucking gore. But it's still disappointing. Now, my actual worst film of the year, most people would go with Transformers Dark of the Moon. And Transformers Dark of the Moon was pretty horrible. I mean, they got Leonard Nimoy just so he could say the Spock line, which actually made no sense in context. But, not to mention all the fucking deep weighing homophobic gay jokes. Really? I shake my head. But Transformers Dark of the Moon, you kind of knew all that shit was coming. And at least the action scenes were entertaining, if extremely long-winded. But, like I said, Transformers Dark of the Moon, you knew what you were getting into. It's the third film in a series, and God, I can't even blame Michael Bay for this. I still refuse to blame Michael Bay for the Transformers series. Why? Because every time he does one of these Transformers films, they make $500 million. The man would be insane to change formats. And believe me, Michael Bay can do a good action film. A smart action film. He did The Island. Except nobody saw The Island, so he doesn't do that style of film anymore. He throws in all the stupid jokes. Why? Because he tried to do good stuff, and nobody saw it. Hell, he did The Rock, and even though some people are going to say Jerry Bruckheimer was a lot of the reasons why The Rock was good, it was still directed by Michael Bay. He obviously did stuff. I mean, you can clearly connect The Rock into his later Bad Boys series and stuff, where he slowly started to or devolve, as some people would say, but you could see the reason why he started to do that was because the movie started to make more money. So blame the audience, or at least blame the screenwriters for Transformers Dark of the Moon, which is, I guess, the socially considered probably the worst film of the year. I mean, a lot of people go to see Twilight, ironically, to put it as hipsters would say. But I will say, at least Dark of the Moon was memorable. I mean, you remember seeing it. It's legendarily bad. And, well, at the very least, the ending scene, well, the ending, I should say, ending movie within the movie, because it's really long enough to be its own film. The battle in Chicago scene was at least well done. I mean, it was action-packed. It still had the problem you weren't sure who was who, when it comes to robots. Was that Starscream? Maybe? Maybe not? What happened to the little tiny bots? I mean, okay, yeah, there were problems with that too, but, the action was exciting and over the top. But at least it wasn't forgettable. You barely remembered it. Like The Eagle, which I saw this year, which was, I mean, I guess you can't blame it. It was okay. It was acceptable. You'll watch it while you watch it, but man, I actually had completely forgotten I'd seen that film until I saw it on the stack of movie receipts that I happen to keep around here, which I have in my hand. And I had completely forgotten I'd seen it. I mean, now that I have physical proof that I saw it, I do remember seeing it, but jeez. It was bland and forgettable, and unfortunately, that's what 2011 was. It was bland and forgettable. I mean, there wasn't a whole lot to come out. I mean, there was good films. Don't get me wrong. I mean, we have the Thor, Captain America, the X-Men, my top 5 there. Even films like War Horse were quite enjoyable, but overall it was very bland, very disappointing. not to really be remembered. This isn't going to be the 1982 of the 21st century, or of this decade. No, no, no. And that's kind of the worst thing. I mean, it's one thing to be so horrible you kind of want to go, what were they thinking that year? Where it almost becomes the movie year that people refer to in the future to go, this is a decade that was so set in its time period, it's almost unwatchable now, but you kind of do watch it just to get a sense for the decade, if you catch my drift when it comes to that. But no, it's forgettable, and most of the films that were released this year will be completely or last year, I guess now, will be completely forgotten. A few will remain and be remembered, but for the most part, they won't be. And which is really disappointing because there was a lot of original new films coming out this year. I mean, like Cowboys and Aliens. Yes, it was from a source material of a comic book, but at least it wasn't a superhero comic book. And it was a comic book that not a whole lot of people had read. Really, it became a favorite of Jon Favreau, and he decided to turn it into a film. It was something new. And I think if this movie year had succeeded in films like that, hell, even Battle of Los Angeles, I mean, yes, it took an old genre, but decided to make it its own film without basing it on a video game or something else. If more of these films had been more successful, I think Hollywood would have started to make more original films like they used to. Would have encouraged greater creativity among its screenwriters and directors and producers. Instead, they all failed, or at least the year turned out to be mediocre, which unfortunately means they'll continue to play it safe, which I think actually all evidence seems to point to is actually ruining this industry. Ticket sales are increasingly down because they produce the same crap. So what'd they do? Well, they have to play it safe, so they produce the same crap because, well, they made a few attempts this year and they didn't pan out. But maybe I'm just being overly pessimistic because we still have 2012 to look at. And this year actually might be the 1982 of this decade because, lo and behold, 30 years later, there's a lot of things to be really excited about. We've got Prometheus coming out. We've got the Avengers film, a new Spider-Man film, The Dark Knight Rises, and The Hobbit at the end of the year. Hell, even the G.I. Joe film looks pretty damn awesome. And in a short while, I'll be seeing the next Underworld movie. Now again, these are all, established genre films. Hell, even Prometheus is based in the Aliens universe. But hopefully we'll see a few new ones we're not expecting. Films that will hopefully surprise us. Maybe John Carter, a film which I'm surprised has taken over 100 years to get made, will surprise us and become a new fan favorite. So here's to 2012, and assuming the apocalypse doesn't occur this year, many more. Signing off, YouTube. Have a happy new year.